The summons. The crystalline walls of the Epherian Grand Chamber stretched upward into infinity, or so it seemed to Commander Lyra Vasquez as she stepped through the dimensional gateway. The chamber existed in a pocket of folded spacetime, a neutral ground where the galaxy's most powerful civilizations had gathered for 3 millennia to settle disputes and forge treaties. Today, humanity would stand before them for the first time. "Remember," whispered Dr. Cale Oren, the linguist walking beside her, "we're not on trial. We're here to present our case for membership." Lyra's jaw tightened. They both knew the truth. The summons had arrived 6 months ago, delivered by a Vexthoral diplomatic drone that materialized in Earth's orbit without warning. The message had been clear: humanity's rapid expansion through the Orion Arm had been noted, evaluated, and judged worthy of examination. But examination by whom? And for what purpose? As they crossed the threshold into the main amphitheater, Lyra's breath caught. The chamber was occupied by beings that defied comprehension. To her left sat the Corvashi, creatures of living stone whose thoughts moved through geological time. Their representative, a mountain-given consciousness, observed her with eyes like molten copper. To her right, the Threnodidae floated in containment fields, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form 8 million years ago. There were dozens more. The 9 Melatter, insectoid philosophers whose hive minds spanned star systems. The Quellan, aquatic beings encased in mobile water spheres. The Drafteneth, silicon-based entities who communicated through color-shifting crystals embedded in their carapaces. Each civilization represented millions of worlds, billions of years of collective wisdom. And then there were the humans. 2 of them. Standing alone in the center of the chamber. "Humanity," boomed a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The speaker was the Arbiter, a youth coral whose species had long ago accepted the burden of maintaining galactic law. Its form resembled a massive tree of blue-white energy, branches extending into dimensions Lyra's eyes couldn't quite follow. "You have been called before the Concordat of Civilized Worlds to address concerns regarding your species' recent activities." Lyra stepped forward, her magnetic boots clicking against the crystalline floor in the reduced gravity. She'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "Honored members of the Concordat, I am Commander Lyra Vasquez, representing the United Earth Coalition. With me is Dr. Cale Oren, our chief xenolinguist. We come in peace and with respect for this august assembly." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the chamber. The Arbiter's branches flickered. "Peace. An interesting word from a species that has engaged in continuous warfare for its entire recorded history." Cale's hand twitched toward the data slate at his hip, but Lyra subtly shook her head. They'd expected this. "With respect, Arbiter," Lyra said, her voice carrying clearly in the strange acoustics of the chamber, "I notice that every species present has similar histories in their developmental stages. The Corvashi shattering wars. The Threnodidae consumption crisis. Should we judge civilizations by their growing pains, or by what they become?" A sound like grinding continental plates emanated from the Corvashi representative. "Bold words for such young ones," it rumbled, each word taking several seconds to emerge. "You have existed as a spacefaring species for barely 2 centuries. We have observed stars being born and dying." "Then you understand patience," Lyra countered. "And you understand that all things must begin somewhere." "The concern," interjected a Quellan, its voice bubbling through translation matrices, "is not your age but your aggression. In 200 years you have colonized 73 systems. You have strip-mined asteroids, terraformed worlds, and encountered 6 primitive species, 3 of which you have attempted to uplift, without their consent." Lyra felt heat rising in her chest. "We've made mistakes. But we've also learned from them. The Kepler 442 incident led to our first contact protocols. The tragedy on New Tasmania resulted in our Environmental Protection Acts. We don't claim to be perfect." "No," interrupted the Arbiter, and the chamber fell silent. "You do not claim perfection. But you do claim something far more dangerous. You claim potential. You claim that your capacity for violence, for consumption, for relentless expansion is balanced by an equal capacity for compassion, creativity, and cooperation." The Arbiter's form shifted, branches realigning to focus on Lyra with uncomfortable intensity. 19 species have stood where you stand now making similar claims. 14 were deemed unworthy and quarantined to their home systems until they evolved beyond their destructive impulses. 3 were sterilized when they attempted to break quarantine. 2 were granted limited membership and proved the wisdom of that decision through millennia of peaceful contribution. Lyra's blood ran cold. 14 quarantined. 3 sterilized. The stakes had just become horrifyingly clear. The Concordat will now present its case against humanity, the arbiter declared. You will listen. You will learn. And then, if you are wise, you will convince us that your species deserves to walk among the stars rather than being caged on your little blue world for the next 10,000 years. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, and Lyra watched as humanity's worst moments began to play out before the assembled aliens. Wars. Environmental devastation. Genocide. All the scars of their violent history, laid bare for judgment. Beside her, Kale whispered, "How do we defend this?" Lyra squared her shoulders and prepared to fight for humanity's future. They had 48 hours to change the galaxy's mind about her species. The trial had begun. The prosecution. The first witness against humanity was a being called Veshrax the Chronicler, a Dravteneth whose crystalline body pulsed with accusatory crimson light. Its species maintained perfect genetic memory stretching back millions of years, making it an ideal keeper of historical records. "I will speak of patterns," Veshrax announced, its words transmitted through chromatic shifts that the translation matrix converted to audible speech. "The pattern of humanity is one we have seen before. 17 times before, to be precise." The holographic display shifted, showing a montage of humanity's military conflicts. Ancient battles with swords and spears dissolved into mechanized warfare, then nuclear exchanges, then the brutal colony wars of the 22nd century. "Observe," Veshrax continued. "From the moment your species achieved consciousness, you have been at war. Not occasionally as evolutionary necessity might dictate, but constantly. In your recorded history of approximately 6,000 years, you have enjoyed a grand total of 268 years of peace. That is 4.5% of your existence." Lyra wanted to object to explain context, but the arbiter had made it clear. They would listen first, speak later. "The Zarvek had a similar pattern," Veshrax said, and the display showed another species, quadrupedal beings with multiple eyes. "They too claimed they were learning, evolving. We granted them provisional membership. Within 50 years, they had instigated the Talaxis conflict, which cost 7 billion lives across 11 systems. We were forced to sterilize their worlds. This is not a decision we make lightly, but it is one we make when necessary." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the Threnodai energy beings. Lyra felt the weight of those billions of lost lives, felt the fear that humanity might follow the same path. Another representative rose, a member of the Nine Maladar Hive. Unlike the others, it spoke with multiple voices in harmony, a chorus that was simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. "We wish to address the specific concern of human expansion velocity. In 200 years, you have spread to 73 systems. By comparison, the Korvashi, despite their aggressive nature and youth, required 3,000 years to achieve similar distribution." The Korvashi representative rumbled in what might have been agreement. "Patience is not a human virtue. More troubling," the Nine Maladar continued, "is your treatment of discovered species. We present Exhibit Gamma 7, the Kepler 442 incident." The holographic display showed a verdant world circling an orange star. Lyra's stomach clenched. She knew this story intimately, had studied it at the Academy as a cautionary tale. In 2247, the Nine Maladar explained, human explorers discovered an aquatic species on this world. They were pre-industrial, possessing basic tool use and complex social structures. Rather than observing from a distance as Concordat protocols demand, humans made direct contact. They introduced technology, medicine, and what they called education. The display showed human researchers interacting with seal-like beings, teaching them written language, showing them star charts. Within 20 years, the Nine Maladar voices harmonized grimly, the native culture had collapsed. Suicide rates quadrupled. Religious wars broke out between traditionalists and those embracing human knowledge. A species that had existed peacefully for millions of years nearly destroyed itself because humans could not resist playing God. "We stopped," Kale muttered under his breath. "We learned." But the prosecution wasn't finished. A Quellan representative surged forward in its water sphere, bioluminescent patterns flashing across its translucent body. "And what of New Tasmania? We present Exhibit Delta 3. This time, the display showed a terrestrial world with vast forests and crystalline oceans. Lyra had visited New Tasmania once. It was beautiful in a haunted sort of way. Humans discovered this world in 2251, the Quellan said. Scans indicated no intelligent life. But there was life, complex, unique, and scientifically invaluable. Did humans study it carefully? Did they consider the consequences? No. They terraformed. The display showed human machines reshaping the landscape, introducing Earth species, altering atmospheric composition. By the time you realized your mistake, the Quellan continued, its voice trembling with something that might have been rage or sorrow, 17 unique evolutionary lineages had been rendered extinct, including one, which we only discovered later through genetic archaeology, that was 3 million years away from developing technological sapience. The weight in Lyra's chest grew heavier. She'd known about the extinctions but not about the proto-intelligent species. That information had been classified, buried in environmental reports no one wanted to acknowledge. "These are not isolated incidents," said another voice. This came from a being Lyra hadn't noticed before, a wraithseer, a species so ancient that most races considered them semi-mythical. It appeared as a vaguely humanoid shape made of dark mist, eyes like distant stars. "We have watched humanity for decades. We have seen your potential, yes. But we have also seen your capacity for self-destruction and worse, your talent for bringing destruction to others." The wraithseer gestured and the display shifted again. This time it showed Earth itself, jewel-like and fragile against the black of space. But as they watched, the image changed, forward-projected simulations based on humanity's current trajectory. In one scenario, human expansion continued unchecked. Within 500 years, humanity had encountered 14 more primitive species. 9 of them ended like Kepler, 442. Contaminated. Destroyed by kindness meant to uplift but instead causing collapse. In another scenario, humanity's resource consumption spiraled. Asteroids stripped bare. Entire systems depleted. And when resources grew scarce, the prediction showed humanity turning on itself. Colony against colony, Earth against the outer worlds, nuclear fire consuming everything they'd built. "We have modeled 73 different futures for your species," the wraithseer intoned. "In 58 of them, humanity destroys itself within 1,000 years. In 11 more, you survive but become precisely the kind of aggressive, expansionist empire that the Concordat exists to prevent. In only 4 scenarios do you evolve into a civilization worthy of true membership. 4 chances out of 73, the Arbiter observed. A 5.5% probability of success. These are not favorable odds." Lyra's mind raced. 5.5%. The same percentage of their history they'd spent at peace. Was that coincidence or causation? Were they truly doomed by their own nature? The wraithseer drifted closer, and Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "We do not wish to quarantine humanity. We do not wish to watch another promising species strangle itself in its own ambition. But we must ask, what makes you different from the 17 species that came before? What makes you believe you can overcome patterns written into your very genetic code?" The question hung in the crystalline air of the chamber. Around them, dozens of ancient species waited for an answer that Lyra didn't yet have. The prosecution rested its case. Tomorrow humanity would get its chance to respond. But as Lyra and Kale were escorted to their quarters, a sterile room at the edge of the chamber, she couldn't shake the images from her mind. The dying cultures. The extinct species. The futures where humanity burned. "How do we defend against our own history?" Kale asked, collapsing onto a bench. Lyra stared at her reflection in the metallic wall. Behind her own face she saw the faces of all humans. The good and the terrible, the visionaries and the destroyers, all mixed together in one flawed, complicated species. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But we have until tomorrow to figure it out." Outside their quarters, the ancient aliens deliberated humanity's fate. The defense begins. Lyra didn't sleep. How could she, with the weight of an entire species resting on her shoulders? Instead, she spent the night reviewing files, studying histories, and searching for the one thing that might save humanity, truth that mattered more than convenience. When dawn came, or whatever passed for dawn in a chamber outside normal spacetime, Kale found her surrounded by holographic displays, her eyes red but determined. "I've been thinking about it wrong," she said without preamble. "We can't defend against our history. Our history is indefensible." Kale blinked. "That's your strategy? Surrender?" "No." Lyra stood, organizing her thoughts like a commander arranging troops. "Our strategy is to not defend what can't be defended. Instead, we explain why our flaws make us valuable, not dangerous." "That's insane." "Maybe. But it's also the only honest answer we have." 2 hours later, they stood once more in the center of the grand chamber. The assembled species watched with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. The Arbiter's energy branches flickered in what might have been anticipation. "Humanity," it intoned. You have heard the case against you. You may now present your defense. We suggest you choose your words carefully. They may be the last your species speaks freely for 10 millennia. Lyra stepped forward, feeling the eyes of countless ancient civilizations upon her. She'd given speeches before, to troops before battle, to colonists facing hardship, to diplomats negotiating treaties. But none of those compared to this moment. Honored members of the Concordat, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I stand before you not to deny the charges brought against my species. Every atrocity mentioned yesterday is real. Every mistake is documented. Every failure is ours to own. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The 9 Malater voices buzzed with confusion. Clearly they'd expected denial, justification, the usual protestations of good intentions gone wrong. The Kepler 442 incident, Lyra continued, was a tragedy born of arrogance. We thought we knew better than millions of years of evolution. We were wrong, and sentient beings paid the price for our hubris. New Tasmania was criminal negligence. We rushed forward without looking, and 17 unique forms of life vanished forever because we couldn't be bothered to wait, to study, to understand before we acted. She paused, letting the admission sink in. Beside her, Cale looked nervous but supportive. They discussed this approach, argued about it, and ultimately agreed it was their only path. As for our wars, Lyra said, the chronicler Veshrax was correct. 4.5% of our history has been peaceful. That means 95.5% has been conflict. We have killed each other over resources, ideologies, gods, borders, and sometimes simply because we feared what we didn't understand. The Korvashi representative leaned forward, its mountain-like form grinding. Then you admit you are unworthy? No, Lyra said firmly. I admit we are flawed. There's a difference. She gestured, and Cale activated their own holographic display. But instead of showing humanity's worst moments, it showed something unexpected. A children's hospital on Mars, where human doctors worked alongside AI systems to cure diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. This is Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Lyra explained, highlighting a woman in medical scrubs. Her grandmother was killed in the colony wars. Her father lost his legs in the Titan Rebellion. She had every reason to hate, to seek revenge, to perpetuate the cycle of violence. Instead, she dedicated her life to healing. She saved over 10,000 lives. Human lives, yes, but also Kelperian refugees from the Alpha Centauri crisis, and Veshlax colonists who were dying from a plague we helped them cure. The display shifted to show a teacher in a classroom on Europa, surrounded by children of multiple human ethnicities and 3 different alien species whose parents worked on the Joint Research Station. This is Marcus Chin, teaching the next generation that diversity isn't something to fear but something to celebrate. He's one of 50,000 educators working across our colonies, building a future where children learn that alien is just another word for friend we haven't met yet. Pretty words and isolated examples, the Quellan representative burbled. This proves nothing. Every species has individuals who transcend their nature. We judge civilizations by their patterns, not their exceptions. Then let's talk about patterns, Lyra said, her voice gaining strength. You're right that we're violent. But do you know what else we are? We're adaptable. You mentioned that we've been at war for 95.5% of our history. But did you notice the trend? In the 20th century we killed roughly 100 million of our own kind. Horrific, inexcusable. But in the 21st century, despite having far more destructive weapons and double the population, our conflicts killed fewer than 10 million. Still terrible, but a 90% reduction. She pulled up statistics, graphs showing the declining trajectory of human violence over time. In the 22nd century, the colony wars killed 250,000 people. In the 23rd century, our most recent major conflict, the Titan Rebellion, killed 15,000. We're not perfect. We're not even good yet. But we're getting better, and we're doing it faster than any other species on record. The Wraith Seer materialized closer, its misty form swirling with interest. Intriguing numbers. But improvement means nothing if the baseline is extinction. You are still the most violent spacefaring species we've encountered in the last 10,000 years. Are we? Lyra challenged. Or are we simply the most honest about our violence? That caused a stir. Several species shifted uncomfortably. Lyra pressed her advantage. I've studied your histories, she said, addressing the chamber at large. The Korvashi shattering wars killed 90 billion of your people over 10,000 years. The Threnodai consumption crisis eradicated 40% of your species before you achieved energy transcendence. The 9 Melata Unity Wars, which you don't like to discuss, involved the forcible absorption of 17 dissenting hives. Every species here has blood on their hands or equivalent appendages. Ancient history, rumbled the Corvashi. Committed before we achieved wisdom. Exactly, Lyra said. You all went through your violent phases. You all made mistakes. You all struggled with the fundamental question of how to balance individual desire against collective need, tribal identity against universal cooperation. The only difference between you and us is time. Time is not a small difference, the Arbiter observed. Time is everything. Millions of years separate you from the eldest species present. In that time they have proven their worthiness. You have not. Kale stepped forward, his expertise as a linguist finally coming into play. With respect, Arbiter, time proves nothing except survival. The universe is full of species that survived millions of years and never achieved anything worth remembering. What matters isn't how long you exist but what you do with the time you have. He pulled up a new display showing human art, music, literature, and scientific achievements. Humanity is 200,000 years old as a species. We've been spacefaring for 200 years. In that cosmically brief instant, we've produced Shakespeare and quantum mechanics, Beethoven and genetic engineering, Michelangelo and faster-than-light travel. We've gone from striking rocks together to striking bargains with aliens in less time than most of you take to blink. Speed of advancement is often speed toward destruction, noted a species that hadn't spoken before, the youth choral observer, related to the Arbiter but apparently junior in rank. The faster you climb, the harder you fall. True, Lyra acknowledged. But speed also means capacity for change. When we make mistakes, we don't need millennia to correct them. We learn fast because we have to. Our violence has taught us the cost of violence. Our mistakes have taught us humility. We're not asking you to accept us because we're perfect. We're asking you to accept us because we're perfectible. She let that word hang in the air, watching as the various species processed it through their different forms of consciousness. Every species you've granted membership to came before you claiming they'd achieved wisdom, Lyra said softly. We're not claiming that. We're claiming something harder to evaluate but more valuable, potential. Not just potential for greatness but potential for growth. We're a species in motion still figuring out who we want to be. That should terrify you, but it should also intrigue you. The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, Lyra felt the first stirring of doubt among the ancient aliens. Not doubt about humanity's flaws, but doubt about their certainty that those flaws were insurmountable. It was a beginning. Small, fragile but real. Tomorrow she would build on it. The human element. The second day of testimony began with an unexpected request from the Arbiter. Commander Vasquez, Dr. Oren, it announced, its energy branches crackling with what might have been curiosity. The Concordat has deliberated on your words. We acknowledge that humanity presents anomalies that complicate evaluation. Therefore we are invoking Protocol 17. Lyra exchanged glances with Kale. They'd studied Concordat procedures, but Protocol 17 hadn't appeared in any of their briefings. The Wraith Seer materialized between them and the Arbiter. Protocol 17 allows the Concordat to summon additional human representatives to provide perspective beyond official ambassadors. We wish to hear from ordinary humans, not just those trained in diplomacy. Lyra's stomach dropped. With respect, we're 47 light-years from Earth. Even with quantum communication coordinating, we anticipated this eventuality, the Arbiter interrupted. Its form shifted, and Lyra realized with shock that the chamber itself was expanding, creating new space within folded dimensions. When we sent our summons 6 months ago, we also sent collectors. They have been gathering a representative sample of your species. They await in the antechamber. Before Lyra could protest the violation of sovereignty, the ethics of abducting humans without warning, or the sheer audacity of ancient aliens pulling people from their lives, a door materialized in the crystalline wall. The first human through was a woman in her 60s, wearing farming clothes and an expression of absolute bewilderment. She had dirt under her fingernails and laugh lines around her eyes. Behind her came a teenager with multiple piercings and a concert t-shirt. Then a businessman in an expensive suit. A scientist. A soldier. A mother carrying a sleeping infant. A priest. An artist. An engineer. 12 humans in total, representing a cross-section of humanity that was either remarkably thoughtful or completely random. Knowing aliens, Lyra suspected it was the former. What the hell is happening? The farmer demanded, her accent marking her as from rural Australia. One minute I'm checking my irrigation systems, the next I'm in a light show that told me I was needed to speak for humanity. This some kind of reality show prank. I wish it were, Lyra said. She quickly explained the situation, the trial, the stakes, the fact that humanity's future hung in the balance. As she spoke, she watched the 12 faces shift from confusion to disbelief to, finally, grim determination. So you're saying, the teenager said slowly, that aliens have been watching us like some kind of cosmic reality TV, decided we're too violent, and now they're gonna lock us on Earth forever unless we convince them otherwise? That's actually a decent summary, Kale admitted. That's bullshit, the soldier said. She was young, maybe 30, with scars on her hands and weary eyes. Who are they to judge us? They are older, wiser, and vastly more powerful, the arbiter said, its voice filling the chamber. We judge because we must. The galaxy cannot afford another Zarvak catastrophe. Now you will answer our questions truthfully. Deception will be detected and punished. The Korvashi representative spoke first, its geological voice directed at the farmer. Human. You who work the soil. Do you not feel shame at what your species has done to your own world? Polluted waters. Destroyed forests. Extinct species by the thousands? The farmer, her name tag read Margaret Sullivan, crossed her arms. Course I feel shame. Anyone with a conscience does. My grandfather watched the Great Barrier Reef die. Broke his heart. But you know what? My granddaughter is gonna see it live again. We're regrowing it piece by piece. Will it be exactly what it was? No. But it'll be beautiful in a new way. You rebuild what you destroyed and call it progress? The Korvashi rumbled skeptically. I call it responsibility, Margaret shot back. My generation made mistakes. Big ones. But we're not making our kids pay for them forever. We're fixing what we can and teaching them to do better. That's what humans do, we break things, yeah, but we also fix things. Sometimes the fixing takes longer than the breaking, but we don't give up. The 9 Malater turned their attention to the businessman. Human. You who trade in commerce. Your economic systems prioritize individual profit over collective welfare. Explain how this does not lead inevitably to exploitation and inequality. The man, Victor Ibarra, according to his ID badge, loosened his tie. You're not wrong. Capitalism has plenty of problems. But it's also lifted billions out of poverty. The question isn't whether a system is perfect. None are, but whether it can adapt. And we are. Universal basic income. Circular economy models. Corporate accountability measures. We're learning that you can pursue profit and purpose simultaneously. Learning, the 9 Malater voices harmonized with what might have been contempt. Always learning. Never knowing. Better than thinking you know everything and being wrong, Victor countered. The Quellan representative addressed the mother, who was gently rocking her sleeping child. Human. You who create new life. Do you consider the morality of bringing more of your violent species into existence? Each child is a potential soldier, a potential destroyer. How do you justify this? The mother's eyes flashed with an anger that surprised everyone. How dare you, she said quietly, but with such intensity that the entire chamber fell silent. This is my daughter Amira. She's 3 months old. You look at her and see a potential destroyer? I see a potential doctor. A potential teacher. A potential bridge builder. Yes, she could become violent. Any being with free will could. But she'll also have every opportunity to become kind, curious, and compassionate. That's what parenthood is, choosing hope over fear. The priest spoke without being asked, his voice gentle but firm. I think I understand what troubles you. You see our capacity for evil and assume it defines us. But capacity is not destiny. Every human has the potential for both terrible darkness and extraordinary light. What matters is which we choose to cultivate. Choice, the Wraithseer mused, drifting closer. An interesting concept. But what evidence do we have that humans collectively choose light over darkness? The scientist, a woman named Dr. Reiko Sato, stepped forward. Look at our trajectory. Yes, we've done horrible things. But examine the data dispassionately. Violence is declining. Education is expanding. Cooperation is increasing. We're not perfect, but the vector is clear. We're becoming better. At what cost? Challenged the youth choral observer. Your improvement comes through trial and error. Each error costs lives. Each trial leaves scars. Perhaps it would be kinder to quarantine you until you evolve past this destructive phase naturally. The artist, a young man covered in paint stains, laughed bitterly. Kinder to lock us up for 10,000 years? That's not kindness. That's fear masquerading as wisdom. You're afraid we'll become like the Zarvek, so you want to cage us preemptively. But here's the thing about cages, they don't make you better. They make you bitter. We offer you time to evolve naturally, the Arbiter said. Evolution requires pressure, the engineer countered. She was older, probably in her 50s, with the confident bearing of someone who'd built things that mattered. It requires challenges, failures, adaptations. Lock us on Earth and we'll stagnate. We'll either tear ourselves apart from frustration or become so comfortable we lose our drive to improve. Either way, you're not protecting the galaxy from us, you're preventing us from becoming who we could be. Lyra watched this exchange with growing pride. These weren't diplomats or trained representatives. They were just humans, flawed, opinionated, passionate humans, and they were defending their species with a raw honesty that no amount of diplomatic training could match. The teenager spoke up again. I've been thinking about your statistics. You said humanity fails in most of your projected futures, right? 58 out of 73, we destroy ourselves. 11 more, we become evil empires. Only 4 where we succeed. Correct, the Wraithseer confirmed. But here's what you're not considering, the teenager continued, her young face serious. Those are projections based on what you think you know about us. But the thing about humans is we're really good at defying expectations. We're unpredictable. Maybe that scares you, but it's also our strength. You can't predict what we'll do because we don't always know ourselves. And yeah, that means we might fail. But it also means we might surprise you. Unpredictability is not a virtue in a galactic community, the Nine Maladders stated flatly. Maybe not, the soldier said. But it is reality. You can try to control us, contain us, predict us. Or you can work with us, knowing that we're going to make mistakes but also knowing that we'll keep trying to do better. Your choice really comes down to this. Do you believe in punishment or potential? The chamber fell silent. Around them, ancient species who had seen civilizations rise and fall, who had watched stars ignite and collapse, who had accumulated wisdom measured in geological epochs, were being challenged by a handful of humans who'd been alive for a collective few hundred years. And somehow, impossibly, the ancient aliens didn't have ready answers. Lyra stepped forward, seizing the moment. You've heard from ordinary humans. Not ambassadors. Not politicians. Just people. And I think you've seen what I was trying to explain. We contain multitudes. We're contradictions made flesh. We're violent and peaceful, selfish and selfless, destructive and creative. We're everything and anything, and we're still figuring out which of those possibilities to embrace. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, of each species present. So yes, we're a risk. But we're also an opportunity. An opportunity to see what happens when a species evolves not through slow, steady progress but through rapid, chaotic transformation. An opportunity to witness something genuinely new in a galaxy that's been largely the same for millions of years. Or, the Arbiter said quietly, an opportunity to watch another promising species burn itself to ashes while taking others with them. That too, Lyra admitted. But isn't that a gamble worth taking? The Arbiter's branches flickered in a pattern that might have been contemplation or might have been doubt. Tomorrow the final arguments would be heard. Tomorrow humanity's fate would be decided. But tonight, 12 ordinary humans had spoken, and the galaxy had listened. The turning point. The third morning began not with grand proclamations but with something unexpected. The Threnodai energy beings requested to speak privately with the human delegation. All of them, the ambassadors and the 12 civilians. They gathered in a side chamber, a space that seemed to exist in perpetual twilight. The Threnodai representative, who identified itself as Luminara, pulsed with gentle golden light as it addressed them. We have listened to your words, Luminara said, its voice like wind chimes in a breeze. We find ourselves troubled. That doesn't sound promising, Victor muttered. Troubled by uncertainty, Luminara clarified. This is unusual for us. We are beings of pure energy. We see probabilities, possibilities, the mathematical underpinnings of reality. By all calculations, humanity should not be defended. The risk-benefit analysis is clear. Yet, Lyra prompted. Yet we remember, Luminara said softly. Before we transcended physical form, we were corporeal beings like you. We fought terrible wars. Not over resources or territory, but over the fundamental question of whether to transcend at all. 40% of our species died in that conflict. Those who refused transcendence and those who sought to force it upon others. The energy being dimmed slightly as if with sadness. We nearly destroyed ourselves at the moment of our greatest potential. The Concordat quarantined us, declared us too unstable for membership. It was the Corvashi, ironically, who argued for giving us another chance. They said that a species wrestling with its own nature was not weak, it was alive. Margaret the farmer stepped forward. What changed their minds? We asked for help, Luminara said simply. Not help to fight our wars or solve our problems, but help to understand ourselves. The Corvashi sent observers who did not interfere but who witnessed. And in being witnessed, in knowing that our choices mattered to beings beyond ourselves, we found the strength to choose better. Kale's eyes widened with understanding. You're saying humanity needs the Concordat not to judge us but to witness us. Perhaps, Luminara pulsed. But I cannot speak for the others. I can only tell you that this conversation has been irregular. We are meeting with you against protocol, sharing our history in ways that might influence the proceedings. Some might call this bias. I call it hope. The Threnodai vanished, leaving the humans alone in the twilight chamber. What just happened? The teenager asked. I think, Lyra said slowly, we just got our first ally. When they returned to the main chamber, the atmosphere had shifted. The species present seemed less monolithic in their certainty, more fragmented in their opinions. The Corvashi and several others were engaged in what appeared to be heated debate, though heated for geological beings meant exchanges that took several minutes per statement. The arbiter called the session to order. The Concordat has reviewed the testimony. We will now hear specific challenges from member species, which the human delegation must address directly. Be warned, these will not be gentle questions. The first challenge came from a species that hadn't spoken before, the Meridian Collective, beings that existed partially in subspace and appeared as shimmering, translucent humanoids. Humans, their representative said, its voice echoing strangely. You speak of your capacity for change. Yet we observe that your most fundamental conflicts persist across millennia. Rich versus poor. Believer versus skeptic. Tribe versus tribe. These divisions seem hardwired into your psychology. How can you claim to be evolving when your basic tribal nature remains unchanged? The priest, Father Miguel, stepped forward before Lyra could respond. Because we're learning to expand the definition of tribe. 1,000 years ago, most humans never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. Their tribe was their village. 500 years ago, their tribe was their nation. Today, our tribe is our species, and tomorrow it will be all sentient beings. The instinct remains, the instinct to care for our own, but we're teaching ourselves that our own includes everyone. Pretty words, the Meridian representative said. But we see humans who still hate others for arbitrary differences. Skin color. Religious belief. Planetary origin. Of course you do, the soldier said, her voice hard. Hate is easy. It's lazy. It's the path of least resistance. But you know what's harder? Choosing not to hate. Choosing to see the humanity, the personhood, in someone who's different from you. And more of us are making that harder choice. Dr. Sato added, you're looking at snapshots, but you need to see the trend line. Yes, we still have bigotry. But it's declining. Interracial marriage was illegal in parts of Earth within living memory. Now it's unremarkable. Religious wars that killed millions have given way to interfaith councils that build communities. We're not done evolving. We're not even close. But we're moving in the right direction. The next challenge came from the Nine Malader. Your individualism troubles us. In our society, the hive is everything. The individual exists to serve the collective. But humans prize individual freedom above all else. This leads to chaos, inefficiency, and endless conflict as individual desires clash. How can such a system possibly lead to galactic citizenship? Victor, the businessman, surprised everyone by laughing. You're asking the wrong question. You assume there's only one path to galactic citizenship, your path. But maybe the galaxy needs different perspectives. Your hive mind approach is efficient, sure. But it's also homogeneous. Every member thinks the same thoughts, reaches the same conclusions. Where's the innovation in that? Innovation is overrated, the Nine Malader voices harmonized. Stability is what endures. Stability is stagnation wearing a fancy dress, Victor shot back. Humanity's chaotic individualism means we approach every problem from 1,000 different angles. 90% of those approaches fail. But that last 10%? That's where breakthroughs happen. Where innovation thrives. Where the impossible becomes routine. Margaret jumped in, her earthy practicality grounding the abstract argument. Think of it like biodiversity. A field with only one crop is efficient, until a disease comes along and wipes it all out. But a field with diverse crops is resilient. Some might fail, but others survive. Humanity's diversity, of thought, of culture, of approach, that's our resilience. The Quellan representative surged forward in its water sphere. Diversity or chaos? We have observed human decision-making. It is painfully slow. Endless debate. Compromise that satisfies no one. Democracy that paralyzes. How can you function as galactic citizens when you can barely govern yourselves? The mother, Amira's mother, spoke with quiet intensity. You know what parenting teaches you? That fast decisions aren't always good decisions. Yes, democracy is slow. Yes, debate is messy. Yes, compromise is frustrating. But you know what's worse? One person or one hive mind, making decisions for everyone without input, without consent, without accountability. We'd rather move slowly and bring everyone along than move quickly and leave people behind. Even when that slowness costs lives, the Quellan challenged. Especially then, the artist said. His name was Devon, and he had paint under his fingernails that matched the colors in his hair. Because the alternative, quick action without consensus, that's how atrocities happen. That's how you get strong leaders who promise efficiency and deliver genocide. We've learned that lesson too many times to forget it now. The challenges continued, each one probing different aspects of human nature. The youth choral questioned humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence. The engineer, Rachel, explained how humans were learning to see AI not as tools or threats but as partners, a new form of intelligence to collaborate with rather than dominate or fear. The Wraithseer questioned human religious diversity, suggesting that a species unable to agree on fundamental cosmological questions was too fractured for unity. Father Miguel, surprisingly joined by the teenager, who identified as atheist, explained how humanity was learning that you didn't need shared beliefs to have shared values. I think God is humanity's greatest creation, the teenager said. He thinks God is the ultimate creator. We disagree on almost everything theological. But we both agree that people deserve dignity, that suffering should be minimized, that the strong should protect the weak. Different paths, same destination. With each challenge, the 12 ordinary humans revealed something profound. Humanity's weaknesses and strengths were often the same thing. Their diversity caused conflict but also resilience. Their individualism created chaos but also innovation. Their emotional intensity led to violence but also to profound empathy and art. They were contradictions that somehow worked. Finally, the Corvashi spoke again, its geological voice resonating through the chamber. We have heard much about human potential. But potential means nothing without proof. You claim you are changing, evolving. Show us proof that your change is real, not merely aspirational. Lyra had been waiting for this. She pulled up a holographic display, but this time it wasn't showing statistics or historical events. It showed communications. Millions of them transmitted from Earth and human colonies in the past 6 months since they'd learned about this trial. When news leaked that humanity was being judged by an alien council, Lyra explained, we didn't try to hide it. We told everyone. All 12 billion humans knew their species was on trial. And do you know what happened? The display showed message after message. Humans of every nationality, every religion, every political persuasion, sending the same basic message. We must do better. We must prove ourselves worthy. Wars that had been simmering for years were suspended by mutual agreement, Lyra continued. Not because we forced anyone but because people chose peace over pride. The Mars-Titan trade dispute that was about to turn violent? Resolved through negotiation. The Europa secessionists who were stockpiling weapons? They voted to pursue political rather than military solutions. The fundamentalist groups on Earth who had been terrorizing their opponents? Their own communities turned against them, saying not in humanity's name. Kale added, we're not claiming these changes are permanent. Maybe they'll last. Maybe they won't. But they prove something crucial. When given a reason to be better, when we understand that our choices matter beyond ourselves, humans rise to the occasion. We're not good by nature. But we're capable of good by choice. The 12 civilians nodded in agreement, and Lyra realized something beautiful. They'd stopped being separate individuals, commander, civilians, different backgrounds and beliefs, and had become something unified. They'd become humanity's true voice. The Arbiter's branches flickered rapidly, processing. The Concordat will deliberate. You will have our decision tomorrow. As they filed out of the chamber, Luminara pulsed briefly with golden light, and Lyra felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Oh. The verdict. The night before the verdict, none of the humans could sleep. They gathered in their shared quarters, these 14 people who'd been strangers days ago but now felt bound by something deeper than friendship. They were connected by the weight of representing an entire species. I keep thinking about everyone back home, the teenager said. Her name was Zara, and Lyra had learned she was a musical prodigy who'd been pulled from a concert hall in New Berlin. All those people who changed their behavior, who chose peace because they knew we were being watched. What happens to them if we fail? They go on living, Father Miguel said quietly. Quarantine isn't death. They'll have their lives, their families, their small joys and sorrows. Just smaller. Limited to one star system for 10,000 years. 10,000 years, Rachel the engineer repeated. That's longer than recorded human history. Every civilization we've ever built could rise and fall again in that time, and we'd still be locked in our cosmic prison cell. Margaret made tea. Somehow she'd convinced their alien hosts to provide herbs that approximated the taste, and distributed cups with a grandmother's casual authority. My granddaughter is 7. If we fail, she'll live her whole life in quarantine. And her children. And their children for 400 generations. All because we couldn't convince a bunch of ancient aliens that we deserve a chance. Not fair to put it that way, Victor said, though his usual confidence was dimmed. We did our best. If it's not enough, that's on humanity's history, not on us. Is it though? Dr. Sato asked. I keep replaying our arguments in my head, wondering if I could have been more persuasive, found better data, made a stronger case. Lyra understood the feeling. She'd spent hours reviewing every word spoken, every gesture made, analyzing what they might have done differently. But Cale had eventually pulled her aside and reminded her of something important. We weren't just making arguments, he'd said. We were being human. Flawed, contradictory, passionate, imperfect humans. If that's not enough, then nothing would have been. Now, sitting in a circle drinking tea light years from home, Lyra shared that thought with the others. Cale's right, she said. We didn't come here to pretend to be perfect. We came here to show them who we really are, in all our messy, complicated glory. If they reject us, at least they're rejecting the truth rather than a comfortable lie. Devon, the artist, had been sketching throughout the conversation. Now he held up his pad, showing portraits he'd drawn of each person present. But they weren't individual portraits, they were interconnected, overlapping, each person's features blending into the next, creating a collective face that was somehow all of them and none of them simultaneously. This is what we showed them, he said. Not individual humans but humanity as a collective contradiction. Maybe that's beautiful. Maybe it's terrifying. Maybe it's both. Everything important is both, Amira's mother said, looking down at her sleeping daughter. This little one is both my greatest joy and my deepest fear. I love her so much it physically hurts, and I'm terrified every moment that something will harm her. Love and fear mix together until you can't separate them. That's humanity. That's everything that matters. The soldier, her name was Lieutenant Sarah Chin, had been quiet most of the evening. Now she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst. I fought in the Titan Rebellion. Killed people who were, genetically speaking, exactly like me. They wanted independence. We wanted unity. Both sides thought we were right and maybe we both were, in a way. But people died. She paused, staring at her scarred hands. I carry that weight. Every soldier does. But you know what I realized sitting in that chamber listening to aliens debate our fate? The fact that I feel guilty about those deaths, that I wake up some nights still hearing the screams, that's not weakness. That's evidence that we have a conscience. We can kill, yes. But we can also regret, learn, and choose differently next time. Father Miguel nodded slowly. In my faith tradition we have a concept called original sin, the idea that humans are born flawed, capable of evil. But we also believe in redemption, in the possibility of grace. Every religion, every ethical system humanity has developed, has wrestled with this duality. We know what we are. The question is whether we can become something better. Philosophy's great and all, Zara said, but I keep coming back to something simpler. Those aliens, they're so old, so wise, so powerful. But when was the last time they created something new? Not new technology or new science, but new art? New music? New ways of seeing the universe. She pulled out her phone, they'd been allowed to keep personal items, and played a recording. Music filled the room, something she'd composed. It was strange, beautiful, incorporating elements of classical human instruments with sounds she'd synthesized to imagine what alien music might sound like. I made this last night, Zara explained, trying to imagine what a symphony written by humans and Threnodidae together might sound like. This is probably wrong. The Threnodidae probably don't do anything like music. But I imagined it anyway because that's what humans do. We imagine. We create. We look at what is and dream about what could be. The room fell silent, listening to her composition. It was hopeful and melancholic, discordant and harmonious, perfectly capturing the contradictions they'd been discussing. When it ended, Victor surprised everyone by wiping his eyes. "Damn allergies," he muttered, but no one called him on the lie. They talked through the night, sharing stories, fears, and hopes. Margaret talked about her farm, how she'd learned to coax life from difficult soil. Devon described his art, how he tried to capture the spaces between things, between people, between moments, between what was and what could be. Dr. Sato explained her research into quantum entanglement, how particles separated by vast distances could still influence each other instantaneously. "Maybe that's us," she said. "Humanity, I mean. We're entangled. What one of us does affects all of us, even across light years. Every act of violence diminishes us all. Every act of kindness elevates us all. We're not truly separate individuals. We're a quantum species, connected in ways we're only beginning to understand." As false dawn approached, the chamber's approximation of a day-night cycle, Kale posed a question. "If we're quarantined, if we fail, will it have been worth it? This journey, this trial, knowing we tried?" "Yes," Lyra said immediately. "Because we told the truth. Because we didn't beg or grovel or make promises we couldn't keep. We stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and said, 'This is who we are. This is what we offer. Take it or leave it.' There's dignity in that, whatever the outcome." The others nodded agreement, and Lyra felt a surge of pride in her species. These 12 people, farmer, artist, priest, soldier, scientist, mother, teenager, businessman, engineer, and more, they were humanity in microcosm. Flawed, brilliant, contradictory, and beautiful. When the summons came to return to the Grand Chamber, they went together, holding hands like children facing the dark. Not because they were afraid, though they were, but because they were human, and humans faced important moments together. The Grand Chamber had changed overnight. The crystalline walls now displayed images from human history, not just the atrocities the prosecution had shown, but everything. Art and war. Science and superstition. Cruelty and compassion. The complete and censored record of humanity's journey from savannah to stars. The assembled species were all present, but their positions had shifted. The Corvashi had moved closer to the center. The Threnodai pulsed with agitated light. The 9 Melators' voices buzzed with what might have been argument. Even the Wraithseer seemed less certain, its misty form flickering between shapes. The Arbiter stood at the center, its energy branches extending into dimensions Lyra still couldn't fully perceive. When it spoke, its voice carried weight that seemed to bend reality itself. "Humanity. You have stood before the Concordat for 3 days. You have been accused, challenged, and questioned. You have defended yourselves not with denial but with truth. This is noted." Lyra's heart pounded. This was it. 10,000 years of freedom or quarantine, decided in the next few moments. "The Concordat has deliberated," the Arbiter continued. "Our decision is divided." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. Apparently, divided verdicts were rare. The vote stands at 17 in favor of quarantine, 14 in favor of conditional membership, and 5 abstentions. This is insufficient consensus for either outcome. Lyra's mind raced. What did that mean? A mistrial? The Arbiter's branches flickered rapidly. "Therefore we invoke the ancient right of the Gauntlet of Proof. Humanity will be given 5 tests, each designed by a different member species, each measuring a different aspect of civilizational worthiness. You will have 1 standard year to complete these tests. Success means membership. Failure means quarantine. Partial success means, we will deliberate further." The Wraithseer materialized beside the Arbiter. "These tests will not be easy. They will challenge your species in ways you cannot anticipate. Some of you may not survive them. Do you accept these terms?" Lyra looked at her companions, her fellow humans, her friends. She saw determination in their eyes, fear tempered by resolve. They'd come too far to back down now. "We accept," Lyra said, her voice clear and strong. "Then so be it," the Arbiter declared. "The gauntlet begins upon your return to Earth. May you prove yourselves worthy of the stars." As the dimensional gateway opened to send them home, Lyra realized something profound. They hadn't won or lost. They'd earned something more valuable, a chance to prove themselves through actions rather than words. The trial was over. The real test was about to begin. The gauntlet. 6 months had passed since humanity accepted the Gauntlet of Proof, and Earth had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Lyra Vasquez stood in the United Earth Coalition headquarters, looking at holographic displays showing the progress of all 5 tests simultaneously. The weight of command had never felt heavier. "Update on Test 1, Kale said, walking into the command center with a data slate. He looked exhausted but energized, the way people do when they're part of something larger than themselves. Test 1 had been designed by the Corvashi, patience and long-term thinking. They provided humanity with the genetic code for a plant that would terraform Mars completely, but only if grown and tended for exactly 100 years without interference or shortcuts. It was a test of whether humans could commit to a goal they wouldn't live to see completed. The Mars colony has established the first growth chambers, Kale reported. 12,000 volunteers have signed contracts binding themselves and their descendants to the project. They're calling themselves the Century Gardeners. 12,000 people willing to dedicate their lives to something they'll never see finished, Lyra mused. A year ago, the Concordat would have said that was impossible for humans. A year ago they might have been right, Kale admitted. But something changed when we came back from that trial. People realized their individual choices actually matter on a cosmic scale. Test 2 scrolled across another display. The 9mm had challenged humanity to achieve perfect cooperation on a global scale. Feed every human on Earth nutritiously for 1 full year with 0 waste and 0 inequality. Not approximately equal, not mostly fed, perfect distribution, perfect efficiency. It had seemed impossible. Earth's economy had never worked that way. But Margaret Sullivan, the farmer from Australia, had taken charge of the agricultural coordination effort. She'd rallied farmers, scientists, and logistics experts into something unprecedented, a global food network that treated all humans as one family. We're at day 178, reported a technician. 0 famine conditions in any region. Waste is down to 0.3% and dropping. If we maintain this pace. We don't just maintain, Lyra said. We improve. Every day. Test 3 was the most terrifying. The Quellan had presented humanity with a choice. They discovered a primitive alien species on a world called Kepler 1649c, pre-industrial and vulnerable. Humanity had to decide whether to make contact or observe from a distance. But the twist, the cruel, brilliant twist, was that the species was dying from a plague that human medicine could easily cure. Non-interference meant watching them die. Interference meant risking another Kepler 442 disaster. Dr. Reiko Sato led the ethics committee wrestling with this decision. For 3 months they debated, consulted, argued. Finally, they'd reached a conclusion that surprised everyone, including themselves. We've chosen to observe, Reiko reported during the daily briefing. But we're also sending the cure, encoded in the genetic structure of a plant that grows naturally on their world. We're not making contact, not imposing our will. We're giving them the tool and trusting them to find it, use it, or reject it as they choose. It's not interference. It's offering a gift and stepping back. The Quellan observers had been silent on whether this satisfied the test parameters. But Lyra thought she detected approval in their bioluminescent patterns. Test 4 came from the Threnodidae, transcend without losing humanity. They'd provided plans for technology that could upload human consciousness into energy matrices, allowing humans to become post-physical like the Threnodidae themselves. The test was whether humanity could refuse the temptation to abandon their physical form for seeming immortality, or if they did pursue it, whether they could do so without losing what made them human. The response had been fascinating. Some humans had chosen transcendence, about 300,000 volunteers. But they'd done something unexpected. Instead of abandoning their physical forms entirely, they'd created a hybrid existence, shifting between energy and matter at will. They called themselves the Threshold, living in both states simultaneously, refusing to choose between physical and transcendent existence. The Threshold representatives sent another report, Kale said. They've been exploring quantum spaces we didn't know existed, but they keep coming back to physical form. They say consciousness without physicality feels incomplete, like a song with only melody and no rhythm. They're becoming something new, neither purely physical nor purely energy but both. The Threnodidae had observed this with what Lyra suspected was surprise. Perhaps even respect. Test 5 was the most dangerous. The Wraithseer had created a scenario. An aggressive alien species called the Carthax had begun expanding toward human space. They were powerful, hostile, and seemingly impossible to communicate with. The test was simple. Demonstrate that humanity could respond to an existential threat without becoming the very thing they feared. War had always been humanity's answer to threats. The Wraithseer was betting that instinct would override evolution. Lieutenant Sarah Chun commanded the defensive forces, but she'd done something revolutionary. Instead of building weapons, she'd built communications. Massive, powerful transmitters that broadcast in every conceivable format, trying to reach the Carthax not to threaten but to understand. Lieutenant Chin is requesting permission to take a volunteer crew into Carthax space, reported a military aide. Unarmed, unshielded, completely vulnerable. She wants to demonstrate peaceful intent by making themselves defenseless. That's suicide, someone objected. Or it's the most human thing we've ever done, Lyra countered. She opened a channel to Sarah. Lieutenant, you're authorized. But take only volunteers who understand the stakes. Sarah's face appeared on the screen, scarred but smiling. Commander, every single person in the fleet volunteered. We're all going. 2 weeks later, the impossible happened. The Carthax responded. Not with weapons but with curiosity. They'd been expanding not from aggression but from fear, fleeing something in their own space. Sarah's vulnerable approach had confused them, then intrigued them. Slowly, painfully, communication was established. The Carthax weren't enemies. They were refugees. And humanity, remembering their own history of displacement and survival, offered asylum. The Wraithseer appeared in the command center. Unauthorized, unannounced, impossible by all known physics, but there nonetheless. You were supposed to fail, it said, its misty form swirling with agitation. The Carthax scenario was designed to be unwinnable. Every other species we tested either destroyed the Carthax or was destroyed by them. You were supposed to prove that violence is inevitable when survival is threatened. We did prove something about violence, Lyra said calmly. We proved that the real violence is seeing only two options, destroy or be destroyed, when creative thinking might find a third way. The Wraithseer flickered, and Lyra could have sworn it was laughing. Humans? Impossible, infuriating humans. You've completed 4 tests in ways we never anticipated and are on track to complete the 5th. The Concordat is recalibrating their expectations. That's good, right? Gil asked. That depends, the Wraithseer said, on whether you want to be judged by the standards we set or by the standards you're setting for yourselves. The latter is considerably more challenging. Then it vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill and a cryptic message. The final month of the gauntlet arrived with surprising calm. The 5 tests were essentially complete, pending final verification. Humanity held its breath, waiting for the Concordat's judgment. When the summons came, Lyra wasn't surprised to find that she wasn't going alone. The same 14 humans who'd stood trial were called to return to the Grand Chamber, along with representatives of all the major test initiatives. The Century Gardeners sent Margaret's granddaughter, who'd taken up her grandmother's work. The Threshold sent a being who existed in multiple states simultaneously. Sarah Chin came directly from negotiations with the Carthax. The Grand Chamber looked different. Where before it had felt like a courtroom, now it felt like something else. A meeting hall. A place of equals. The Arbiter's branches were arranged in a pattern that Kale's linguistic analysis suggested was respect. Humanity. You accepted the gauntlet of proof. You were given 5 tests designed to measure your worthiness for galactic citizenship. These tests were crafted to be nearly impossible, challenging the very limits of what an emerging civilization could achieve. Here it comes, Lyra thought. Success or failure decided now. You did not complete these tests as designed, the Arbiter continued. You completed them in ways we did not anticipate, could not predict, and frequently did not understand until we observed the outcomes. The Corvashi test of patience. You approached not with resignation but with joy, turning a burden into a legacy. The 9 Malater test of cooperation. You solved not through control but through trust. The Quellen test of interference. You navigated with a wisdom that honored both compassion and autonomy. The Threnodai representative, Luminera, pulsed forward. The Transcendence test was meant to measure whether you would lose yourselves in the pursuit of immortality. Instead, you created something we thought impossible, a bridge between physical and energy existence. The Threshold are a new form of consciousness, one that even we do not fully understand. You did not transcend or remain physical. You chose both. The Wraithseer materialized last. And the Carthax. You were meant to fail, to prove that survival instincts override ethical evolution. Instead, you demonstrated that humans have evolved an instinct more powerful than self-preservation, the instinct to connect, to understand, to find common ground even with those who appear to be enemies. Lyra's heart raced. Was this approval or merely acknowledgement? The Arbiter's branches extended, touching representatives from each Concordat species. We have reached unanimous consensus. Humanity has passed the gauntlet of proof. But more significantly, you have shown us something we had forgotten in our millions of years of existence. That wisdom is not the absence of flaws but the constant choice to become better despite them. The chamber erupted in sounds, grinding stone from the Corvashi, harmonized voices from the Nine Melatter, pulses of light from the Threnodidae, each species expressing approval in their unique way. Humanity is granted full membership in the Concordat of Civilized Worlds, the Arbiter declared. Not because you are perfect, but because you have demonstrated the two qualities we value most, the humility to acknowledge your flaws and the courage to transcend them. Welcome, humans, to the galactic community. May you teach us as much as we teach you. Lyra felt tears streaming down her face and she didn't care who saw them. Beside her, Kale was laughing and crying simultaneously. Sarah Chin stood at attention, saluting nothing and everything. Margaret's granddaughter was hugging a threshold being, which created a bizarre but beautiful image of physical and energy forms embracing. But it was Zara, the teenage musician, who perhaps captured the moment best. She pulled out her instrument and began to play, not the song she'd composed in anticipation of judgment, but something spontaneous, joyful, incorporating sounds and patterns from all the species present. And one by one the aliens joined in, each adding their unique voice to a symphony that had never existed before. It was chaotic. It was discordant. It was perfectly harmonious in its imperfection. It was, Lyra realized, the sound of humanity finally finding its place among the stars. 3 months later, Lyra stood on Mars, watching the Sentry Gardens grow under the care of committed humans who would never see the final result but who tended the plants with love nonetheless. In orbit, Earth coordinated its food distribution with machine-like precision that somehow never felt mechanical, because it was driven by humans who'd learned that taking care of each other wasn't a burden but a privilege. On Kepler 1649c, a primitive species discovered a plant with miraculous healing properties, never knowing that it had been left by beings from beyond their sky. In quantum spaces, the Threshold explored realities that physical beings had never accessed, but always returned to share their discoveries, refusing to abandon the realm they'd come from. And on the border of human space, Sarah Chin stood beside Carthax refugees, building a new colony together, proving that former enemies could become friends when fear was replaced with understanding. The galaxy watched humanity with new eyes. Not as a threat to be contained or a problem to be solved, but as partners in the eternal work of becoming better than they were yesterday. Lyra received a final message from the Arbiter, private and personal. Commander Vasquez. The Concordat thanks you for reminding us why we formed this organization millions of years ago. Not to impose order on chaos, but to nurture the possibility that chaos might spontaneously organize itself into something beautiful. You did not prove that humans are perfect. You proved that perfection is overrated. In a galaxy of ancient, stable, wise civilizations, you bring something we desperately needed, the reminder that growth requires discomfort, wisdom requires mistakes, and progress requires the courage to try even when failure seems certain. Humanity will make mistakes, the Arbiter continued. Terrible ones probably. But we will be there to help, not to judge. And perhaps, in teaching you, we will remember what we have forgotten in our millions of years of existence. That being young, flawed, and chaotic is not a failure. It is a beginning. Lyra looked up at the stars, at the vast galaxy that humanity now had the freedom to explore, knowing that somewhere out there ancient beings were watching not with fear or judgment, but with hope. The trial was over. The real adventure was just beginning. And for humanity, contradictory, passionate, impossible humanity, that was exactly how it should be.